Okay, class, today we're going to talk about the ideas of conflict, point of view, and symbols. Now, not all of this is in the slide. Some of it is just in the textbook. So making sure you're looking at the pages is important that I actually give you for the definitions from the textbook. So the first thing we're going to focus on is this idea of conflict, that idea of that struggle between two opposing forces, the idea that conflict happens in everyday life. It's not something out of the ordinary. It is definitely something that we experience in everyday life. So it's that idea of the challenges that we face in that daily aspects, but being able to question who we are, and that's where the growth comes in. Now, in this, the one is like the idea of we either learn or we evolve or we remain ignorant and repeat the same mistakes. So this is that idea of fitting into the characterization of dynamic versus static. A dynamic character will learn and evolve with the conflict, whereas a static character will remain ignorant and repeat the same mistakes. So keeping in mind these things all connect and grow together. And looking also at this idea of conflict, if we don't have conflict, we don't grow. Okay, we don't progress, we don't move. So in pieces of literature, the author on purpose puts in conflict. You need conflict in order to have progression in the story. You need it to make it interesting. You need it to have suspense. But without conflict, there is no story. It's just boring. And this is where it usually comes in. Nonfiction usually has no conflict aspect within that. Now, there are two main forms of conflict. We have internal and external. Internal is the struggle that takes place like here inside the person's mind. So this is like Willy Loman. This is what we call this, referred to as person versus self. So this would be Willy Loman versus himself. So him trying to decide, do I commit suicide? Do I not? This is Gatsby making the decision within himself to earn more money and to achieve he wants Daisy. So it's that fighting within himself to have that aspect here. Okay, so this is internal conflict. External conflict, there are three main types. So you're a person or struggling with an outside force, and there, like I said, three different forms. So person versus person. So this is someone versus another character. So if we're looking at Death of a Salesman, this is Willie versus Biff. So if we're looking at that aspect. If we're looking at The Great Gatsby, it's Gatsby versus Tom or Gatsby versus Daisy, and trying to figure all of that out. Okay. One thing that Rita Kalechian mentions about her note cards is that she was actually using the same story for all of her note cards. If you want to do that, so if you're using like the examples of conflict for each or the example of plot for each, that might help you in doing your note cards better. So like I'm using a lot of the same similar examples with the same pieces of literature. You can choose one and do the same thing. Okay, person versus society. So it's the character's problems with the laws or beliefs of a group of people. So this definitely fits into Willie versus society. So he doesn't want to sell his house. He doesn't want to change. He doesn't want that aspect of, he's like that stubborn or that obdurate aspect within the American dream itself. So it's that him fighting against the ideals and the beliefs and the laws of society. Then we go to this idea of person versus nature. So this is the character's problem with the force of nature or some aspect of the environment. So this is like our Walden out in the middle of the woods being there and having to deal with the different forces of nature. This is someone having to deal with a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake or something like that. Someone out on a camping trip and having to deal with the idea of the different aspects of a car breakdown, and now they have to be in the woods and stuff like that. So it's definitely the natural aspect of what they're fighting. Okay, point of view. From now on, you will see it as POV. It is the easiest way, instead of having to spell out point of view. This is one of the acronyms that I will let you use from now on. You don't have to spell out point of view. Okay, so this is the author's perspective from which they present the story. So in other words, it's who's telling the story. Okay, it's not necessarily the author, but it's the voice that's speaking and telling the story to us. Okay, in nonfiction, it was always the author, it was always the speaker. But when we're looking at literature or fiction pieces, we have a narrator of some type. Okay, the narrator is the person who tells the story, and it's told from two different perspectives. You have first person POV or you have third person POV. So looking at this first person, this is the idea of the person uses pronouns. That's I, me, our, we, or my. So they're first person pronouns. They're putting themselves in the story. The narrator is usually a character, and usually they're the main character. So it's them telling you their story. Okay. So when we're looking at Three Sisters, which we started reading today, we're getting it from first person point of view or first person POV. We have one of the three girls actually telling the story and narrating herself into it. Okay, it may show some bias. And this also is where the idea of an unreliable narrator comes in. So if we go all the way back to ninth grade with The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield gives us that first person perspective within The Catcher in the Rye, but he's also an unreliable narrator because he lies to us all the time, and he's biased in the situations. So coming into that aspect is important. Third person omniscient. So there are a couple third persons that you need to be aware of because they're different aspects of it. So we have third person omniscient. This is story uses he, she, they. So, but omniscient means all knowing. So this is kind of like God watching you, and he knows all of the aspects of your life. And through the story, he's telling all of the aspects. So he knows everything going on with the characters. He knows the insides, he knows the outsides, he knows the setting, the characteristics, and he knows everything, the story, but he's not in the story. Okay, so look at the last bullet point. The narrator is outside of the story, but he's looking in. It's almost like he's in the peephole spying on them, and he's telling us everything that's going on through that little peephole. Okay, the next one we have is third person limited point of view. So the story is limited. So the knowledge that the narrator has is focused on one or two people or one or two incidents. So it's very specific in the limitations. Okay, and I will definitely show you third person limited in this unit. Okay, and it's not one we use very often. Normally we're going to have first person or we're going to have third person omniscient because limited is not necessarily there all the time. Okay, other ones you're going to see from the notes is stream of consciousness. So that idea that an author is constantly, as they're writing, their thoughts are changing. Holden does this all the time. It's like 1 minute he's talking about the ducks, then he's talking about nuns, then he's talking about swear words. So it's the idea that as it comes out of your brain, it just keeps going and going and going. Okay, symbol. So symbol, we have two different types of symbols. We have literary and we have conventional. Okay, so we also have this idea of concrete and abstract. Literary is the idea that the symbols come from literature. So usually they're going to be like Shakespearean or mythological or something within. They seem like an illusion, but it's something that is like Garden of Eden and the serpents from the Adam and Eve story. Those are all literary because they come from a book, a piece of literature. Okay, but then on the other side, you have conventional symbols. These are symbols that we have developed through time. Okay, and I'm going to show you some of those. So like the cross that symbolizes a church, the red plus sign that means a hospital, those types of aspects. Okay, so the ideas here is a symbol is something we have concrete. It's usually a person, place, event. Or it can stand, and it's used to stand for something abstract. So it symbolizes something else. Okay, and when we're looking at the idea of the meanings here, one example is compare the symbolic meaning of the American flag to an American citizen with its meaning to an Iranian citizen. So the American flag is going to mean something to an American citizen versus the American flag meaning something to an Iranian citizen. So that difference within the two is important. So one major symbol, and I'm going to go through a couple of them here, okay? Sunset. This is a concrete symbol, and it stands for the idea of being something abstract. So this is where the idea of it, because the sun is going down, it's like the sunset of your life. So the idea that death is coming upon us or change is coming, if we're going with the more abstract idea in a character's life. Okay, so if we look back to Gatsby, his funeral and death and everything, yes, we're in the summer, but it was more that idea of that sunset aspect going on within there as well. A snake. A snake is concrete, but it can symbolize a form of evil. Okay, that abstract. So this would be a literary symbol because of the fact that it comes from literature. So if it's biblical symbolism, it comes from that idea of literary works, and they're important. These are ones that over the next couple of weeks that we're doing allusions on the opposite weeks of vocabulary, it's going to bring us back to this idea of symbols like this. And that's why I'm teaching you those allusions, is so that you can know those literary symbols. Okay, another one, an apple. An apple is concrete, but in the abstract form, it usually stands for that idea of knowledge or sin or love or fertility or temptation. Knowledge, because the idea of, giving a teacher an apple, it's that idea of that knowledge aspect with the teacher. The idea of fertility and sin, going back to the Garden of Eden, and that idea of temptation. Love fits in there too, because Eve loved Adam so much that she was tempted and to let him sin. So that fits in there. And it's also the round shapeness of it, the eternity and the idea of the earthliness. Okay, that is it for tonight. I will go over the rest tomorrow. So go ahead and get started on these note cards. Now, noticing the apple, the snake, and the sunset, they don't have separate note cards, but those are examples of that idea of the literary or the conventional symbolism that is in the textbook. Okay, have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow.